Welcome to our lecture on Christine de Pizan. She's a wonderful figure to assess the transition from medieval to modern times. Born around 1364, dying around 1430. Her family came from the Republic of Venice. Her father, de Pisano, because of the original town from which family came. The father eventually took them to the court of Charles V in France, and this is during the time, and again, we're going to get a little more about the 100 Years' War here because that's the background. Very important, one of the decisive factors leading out of the Middle Ages, because nationalism really gets crystallized in this cauldron of war, and also, as we'll see with some of these battles, the military technology, the change, about which Christine even wrote herself on military tactics and such. These spelled the end of the feudal noble being the decisive factor in warfare, and that was the basis of their power. So that's going to be the transition from the aristocratic warrior to the courtier, where a lot of the nobles had to find work, as it were, and constellated around the growing national power centers. So her father, Christine's father, made sure that she got a good education, and she then went on to read voraciously in the library of the court of King Charles, and that clearly has its effect in making her, as they say, the first female professional writer. She was able to make a living off of her writing, which is hard enough in any age for any of us to do, but this was born of a great and urgent need. She had married a notary and royal secretary in the court of King Charles. Happy marriage, but it seems as if her husband died of the plague. She was left, and her father had died the previous year, so she was left with 3 children, her mother, and a niece to take care of. The property of her husband was embroiled in all these lawsuits, so she was desperate, on the brink of destitution, and all of these people depending on her. She turned to writing love poetry because she had a good sense of what would sell in this time, and she made sure that people knew it was a woman. So there was enough of a change in the cultural attitudes of the time where this would be a selling point, and she knew it. So she had a good sense of a shift, I think, going on in the spirit of the age. Again, the background here is the later stages of the 100 Years' War. We could break into 3 different phases. The Edwardian War, which we've already seen in a couple of previous videos. From 1337 to 1360, the opening phase, when Edward III of England is the one prosecuting this, therefore the Edwardian. Great success, Battle of Crécy, Battle of Poitiers with the Black Prince, leading to the Treaty of Bretigny, which was a way of resolving the feudal interimplications of the kings of England and France by giving a greater Aquitaine, the southern part of France, free and clear to the King of England, so that he didn't have to give feudal obeisance on the basis of those properties to the King of France, and in return, the King of England would surrender any claim to the French throne. So that was the disposition in 1360. France was merely biding its time to restart the war, and that is called the Caroline War, the second phase, under Charles V, and that would begin in 1369. This went very well for the French, and by about 1378, the English gains of the first phase of the war were reversed. But Charles V died, and his son Charles XI succeeded in 1380, and he was only 11, so he always trouble for these dynastic successions. A child, and even beyond that, he ended up displaying psychotic tendencies. So Charles the Mad. So this is a difficult bind for the French country to be in. This the regencies under which Charles VI was placed, that is, he had advisors who basically actually conducting government. There was jockeying between two sets of noble houses, and that led to a civil war in France, the Armagnac-Burgundian Civil War between 1407 to 1435. This has to do with the House of Orleans, allied to the Armagnacs against the House of Burgundy, which is more southerly. So we have northern and southern houses here. All right, so that made a mess of things in France, and then King Henry V, the second of the Lancastrian kings, remember Richard II was deposed by Henry IV, John of Gaunt's son. Henry V is his successor, and he sees his opportunity and opens the final phase of the war, the Lancastrian phase. And this is a two-part thing. The first half goes very well for the English, and then ends up with English defeat. On St. Crispin's Day in 1415, you know, the great speech in Shakespeare's play, and maybe you know it better from Kenneth Branagh's movie, but in 1415 you have the overwhelming victory of the English again, with the longbow, able to, masked longbow archers are piercing the plate armor even of the nobles on their horseback. It's a devastating defeat for the French. Many French noble houses are destroyed. I mean, it is devastating for the upper class of France, especially the Armagnac faction, actually. That also indicates that things are changing, that any commoner could be trained to shoot the longbow. It didn't take much to outfit them. It's not expensive as opposed to putting plate armor, having the war horses, and all of the whole feudal organization that's necessary to get that medieval tank, the mounted knight, up and going, right? Well, it's useless in the face of this technology, which had existed before, but the Welsh were using it against the English picked it up, and now it's being introduced to the continent. All right, so that first phase of the Lancastrian War ends with the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. It's very favorable to the English. That is, the agreement is that on the death of Charles the Mad, Charles VI, King Henry V would be crowned King of France. This wasn't really accepted by the French either, and we have a second phase of the Lancastrian War with Joan of Arc, who's the great turning point. And it's one of those, you know, there's many things in history that make you go, huh? But Joan of Arc, as the one who changes the whole course of the 100 Years' War, this is one of the most surprising things you're ever going to come across. The 17-year-old maiden goes to the Dauphin, the son of Charles VI, Charles, who will become Charles VII, and says, I've been getting visions from God. I'm supposed to lead the French army to victory over the English. Okay, well, Charles VII isn't, the young Dauphin isn't eager to have her help, but they're in desperate straits here. The English are besieging Orleans. If that city had fallen, it would probably mean the end of the war and English victory. So it's 1428. Joan is there not as a military genius, really, but as a person of so immense, such charisma. The people rally, and the siege is broken. The English are beaten. She keeps on pushing so that she clears out France, which is where the French kings are traditionally crowned. And she sees Charles VII crowned as king in 1429. It's because of Joan of Arc. It would not have happened without her. It's wild. Unfortunately, she gets captured. Oh, so at this point, Christine de Pizan writes her last real work, the La Ditié of Joan of Arc, the poem of Joan of Arc. And she says, I've been crying for over a decade for France. It looked bad. And this woman who celebrates the strength of women, she's given this figure, Joan of Arc, right there, and it vindicates everything she's ever said, right, about the beauty and nobility of women. and she sees her king. I mean, even though she's originally Italian, she's become French. I mean, that's where her heart is. So Christine writes this poem. It seems as if she died before she saw the betrayal of Joan of Arc, which is probably a good thing. She would have broken her heart, obviously. The Burgundians, this faction, they're not quite with the French team. They're playing both sides. They're allied with the English sometimes. They capture Joan of Arc. They ask Charles VII to ransom her. He can't seem to find the money, and this is, I mean, it really is a betrayal on the part of the king, who was put on the throne by this maiden. But they sell her to the English. The English put her on trial for heresy, and they burn her at the stake. And I think that's 1431. It's one of the great crimes. But the French have already derived their benefit strategically, tactically in the war. They take Bordeaux, which is the great seat of the southern holdings of the English in the French territory. And then a couple of years later, they do the final battle of Castillon. This is because the people of Aquitaine have been under English rule for 3 centuries, so they think of themselves as English. They don't like the French taking over Bordeaux, and they ask for help. The English come in one last time, get beaten. And here it's another technological factor. Field artillery is used by the French this time. They're the ones using the advanced technology, and that is devastatingly used. So the English are beaten. They're driven out of France. This is a complete reversal. The English are out of Normandy. They're out of Aquitaine. They only hold one port city, Calais, which they'll hold for a while, but that's it. That's their only holding on the continent. Okay, so that's the background. The Lancastrian War it's during this time that Christine dies, but she sees Joan of Arc, that high point of French rejuvenescence, and then she dies. Well, let's turn to her work with this question in mind, because what Christine really raises for us is the question of woman. Now, that's always tricky to say, the Jewish question or the woman question. It seems, well, from what perspective are you asking the question? But if we just, without saying we're in a superior position, we're just saying, well, the status of women has always been precarious in history. Women have suffered at the hands of male power. So we want to ask ourselves, how is the dignity of women faring in our time and place? If we want to ask the question of woman, as it were, right now, if it is one of the great triumphs of modernity to try to secure some stability for the dignity of women, is that an unalloyed victory? Has it been the case that we are still holding to the things that Christine has pointed out here? I don't think we can be too smug about it, because in fact there's a misogynistic tendency is recrudescent, and it's a difficult thing to root out in the human heart. At the beginning of the 15th century, Christine is engaged in this controversy called the Querelle de Rose, the Quarrel of the Rose, which is about the romance of the rose. I promised you we'd see this again. Especially Jean de Meun's huge amplification of the part, which is seen as having many misogynistic passages. Now, in a way, he's just taking up an old tradition. It's there, Aristotle. It's there in Ovid. It's just there. And Christine reacts very strongly and says this is she takes apart the arguments, as it were, in the Roman de la Rose as far as the misogyny. And this can be seen as the opening phase of the Querelle de Femme, the quarrel about women, the woman question, and which is an ongoing thing. Feminists still talk about the status of women, and we need to keep. And that's what this question is. It's another way of asking it. She's the one who's really launching this question, but the first woman to do so, certainly, and that gives you some sense of the vitality of the medieval mind, because she is still a medieval. It is clear, just like Dante and Chaucer, there's a transition from the medieval to something else, but they are medievals who are transitioning to something else, which is to say modern superciliousness with regard to previous ages doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, one age, insofar as it has strengths beyond the one that came before, those strengths only stand because of what has come before too. I mean, so we have to always look in this dialectical relationship of the ages. The book, Le Livre de la Cité des Dames, the book of the City of Ladies from which our selection comes, is a way of a kind of a closing argument for the Quarrel of the Rose on the part of Christine. This controversy had taken into its ambit a lot of important voices, including the Chancellor of the University of Paris at the time, Jean Chasson, very, very important theologian at the time, who was involved at the same time. Here's again another background as far as the crisis of the 14th century. He was putting forward the conciliarist position with regard to the Great Papal Schism. So that's always in the background too, precisely this period. The Book of the City of Ladies is, and it's ladies, dame, not woman. So that's important. And she's trying to ennoble every woman. It's not just the people who belong to the aristocracy. It's those of a certain kind of spirit that she's ennobling by the title lady. And it's completed by 1405. You have three figures who are clearly inspired by Boethius. So again, as with Chaucer, two very important figures for Chaucer are very important figures for Christine. Boethius and Boccaccio. Very important for both of them, decisive. Boethius has this constellation of philosophy in which he is comforted. He's on death row. And Lady Philosophy comes and comforts him. At the beginning of the Book of the City of Ladies, Christine is in anguish because she's reading another misogynistic account of how women are morally depraved and they're inferior. And she's thinking, why would God make such a worthless creature? And she begins to say, well, they're right. They're all right. And what am I? It's this existential crisis that this misogynistic vituperation, it's getting inside of her. And that's what happens. You say a thing often enough, all the powerful voices in society say something, well, you're going to start believing it. And then she falls asleep and she has a vision. So this is like the Romance of the Rose, like the Constellation of Philosophy. There's a dream vision here. And three ladies come, Lady Reason, Lady Rectitude, and Lady Justice, who help her build a city in thought. So again, this is the tradition of Plato and Augustine, the city of God. She's adding to that. She's trying to create here a free imaginary space in which the status of women can be rehabilitated, recuperated, thought anew. And Lady Reason helps her build the foundation. Lady Rectitude helps her fill the city with houses and so on. And Lady Justice helps her add the finishing touches and places the queen, who is Mary, the mother of Jesus, and that's the ordered polity here. It's no longer as in this whole tradition. We've asked this from the beginning of the great conversation. What does it mean to be civilized? It has something to do with this culture that cities make possible. But as we see with Plato's Republic, it's a city in thought, in word, and that's the space. She's this great writer, Christine de Pizan, is opening up a space in which something new can happen for society, an experimental realm, a place of newness, a place of publicity too, a place where she's addressing other reasonable human beings and saying, can we think this through together? Can we talk about this together? And in the course of these three different ladies in the three parts of the book, a whole dozens of women are adduced as examples of virtue, as being exemplary. And she's getting a lot of these examples, the bulk of them, from Boccaccio's work on famous women. And there's another link between. Chaucer himself has the Legend of Good Women as one of his works. So the previous attempts to kind of soften misogyny would be to give you examples of clearly just good women. Christine is taking that tradition on, but is expanding and saying it's not just these women, though. She softens any misogyny that's still there in Boccaccio, and she's saying, look, the real problem is education. women are not educated. So here I'll make a plug for the Abigail Adams Institute. This is a line that's going to sound very familiar to anyone who knows Abigail Adams's work. She talks about how it's so important to receive that education. Abigail Adams got her father taught her, and that was rare enough. And Christine was taught by her father. This opens up new possibilities. It opens up a new space, a whole city, a different kind of civilization is possible if women are educated. And that's part of the mission here, is to make sure that we're all getting the same chance to engage in the conversation with the great spirits of history. That we all need it. And we all need this to live out what Christine keeps pointing to, that women have equal dignity because they're made in the image of, women are made in the image of God as men are made in the image of God. We have this shared dignity. She's still a Christian. This isn't modern post-Christian thinking here. Now she, like Abigail Adams, is also still very conservative and all that. We could talk about that, about how there's this reticence of the original feminists of any generation to go to certain other thoughts, but that's the question though. I mean, which ones are worth extending? Which ones do we need to think about? Where does class fit in? That's that intersectional question. Where does class fit into the question of misogyny? I mean, when Chaucer gives us all of these figures to look at, he's showing us figures that don't usually emerge into the space. Christine gives us some figures from the other classes, but is there a blind spot there? We want to ask those questions too. But in the end, what Christine gives us is this ability to reimagine our social life in a way that would try to honor the dignity that is shared by every single human being, no matter male or female. And she does this by taking up the riches of the classical tradition and the medieval tradition and trying to think it through anew, which is exactly what the great conversation is about, is thinking it fresh, but not leaving it behind. That's a great accomplishment of this book, is that she's not saying, oh, you're all misogynist. She's taking it, thinking it through, taking what's good and trying to extend the good and critiquing what might be not fully up to the demands of human dignity. And that, I think, is an example we all really should take to heart. She's shown us a path that we are still walking down, and we need to keep feeding ourselves along the way, especially with this book of the City of Lake.